"Mom, please sit in the back row." The voice was sharp, firm, like I didn't belong anywhere else. I froze in the middle of the aisle, sunlight streaming across my face through the stained glass window. The front row, the place where Dad used to sit every Sunday, stood empty. Only a single bouquet of white lilies rested there, like a placeholder for someone they wanted to forget. My brother was up front, chatting with the pastor, acting like the man of the family. Busy, important. Relatives on both sides glanced at me, barely meeting my eyes. No one asked how I'd been holding up. No one cared that I was the one who sat by Dad's hospital bed night after night. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the crumpled envelope, Dad's handwriting on the front, his final words, the letter no one else knew about. So I sat in the back row, right where they told me to, but deep down, one question wouldn't let me go. If I stayed silent today, would Dad's voice be lost forever? I sat there, clutching that worn envelope, and all I could think was, when did I become the outsider in my own family? Growing up, it hadn't always been this way. Dad used to pull me to the front pew when I was little, letting me sit beside him while the choir sang. My shoes barely touched the floor back then, but I felt 10 feet tall. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it was when I turned down the family business, or when I moved out of town for college and didn't follow the same path as my brother. He stayed close, married the right girl, took over Dad's accounts. I was the one who chose something else, and maybe that was the moment I lost my seat in this family. I could still hear Dad's voice sometimes, stern but proud, saying, "Don't let anyone tell you where you belong, kid." But lately, even his voice felt like a distant echo. I glanced toward the front. The seat beside the lilies stayed empty. My brother hadn't taken it. No one had. It's funny, isn't it? How people fill your life when you're gone but leave your seat empty while you're alive. Behind me, the whispers started. She's always been dramatic. Probably looking for attention again. They spoke as if I wasn't there. Maybe in their minds, I wasn't. I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes. I wasn't going to cry here, not in front of them. Instead, I opened the envelope just a little. Dad's handwriting, shaky but familiar, greeted me like an old friend. The first line hit me like a punch to the chest. If you're reading this, they didn't let you speak, did they? I closed the envelope again, my fingers trembling. He knew, even at the end, he knew exactly how today would play out. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. I sat there in that cold, quiet back row, wondering how I ended up so far from the man who taught me to stand tall, and whether I still had it in me to do it one more time. "Okay, we're starting in 5, my brother said, loud enough for everyone but me. He stood up front, straightening his tie, glancing at the pastor like they were co-planners of some corporate event instead of Dad's farewell. I watched him from the back, his shoulders squared, his face calm, his voice practiced, like this was just another meeting he had to run smoothly, no cracks, no grief that showed. And maybe that's what bothered me the most. He didn't glance my way, not even once, as if I hadn't been there during the nights when Dad couldn't breathe, as if I hadn't held Dad's hand when the monitors flatlined. To him, I was just someone who left, someone who wasn't there when it counted. But I was, just not in the ways he wanted. Aunt Marjorie leaned toward him. "Is your sister going to say anything today?" He gave a short laugh, dry and final. "She's just here to pay her respects." Just here. I bit my tongue so hard it hurt. For a second, he paused near the front row, the one with the lilies. I wondered if he would sit down, claim the spot Dad left behind. But he didn't. He stayed standing, hands clasped in front of him like a businessman at a press conference. That chair stayed empty, like it was waiting for someone else. "Places, please," he called, ushering everyone into their seats. People shuffled quietly, heads bowed, whispers fading. No one invited me forward. No one asked if I wanted to say goodbye. I saw the way they looked at me, like a distant cousin they barely remembered, rather than the daughter who held Dad's hand as he slipped away. I took a slow breath and rested my palm over the envelope again. Dad's voice rang in my mind. Don't wait for permission to do what's right. But still, I stayed seated. For now, the pastor cleared his throat, beginning the service in that slow, steady voice meant to comfort the living and honour the dead. But I couldn't focus. I stared down at my lap, fingers curled around that fragile envelope, feeling the weight of words no one else knew existed. Around me, the room was still. No one spoke my name. No one turned around to check if I was okay. And for a moment, God help me, I thought about letting it go. Letting them have their version of Dad. Letting them control this narrative, the way they controlled everything else. Maybe it would be easier to stay quiet. Maybe this battle wasn't worth it anymore, because what was the point of speaking when no one wanted to listen? But then, something shifted. I heard a faint creak from the front row, the empty chair. It was almost like it sighed, like it remembered me sitting beside Dad all those years ago, our shoulders brushing as he whispered jokes during sermons. That chair wasn't meant to be empty today, and Dad's voice, soft, clear, steady, came back to me in a whisper only I could hear. If you let them silence you now, you'll regret it forever. I closed my eyes for just a second, feeling the sting behind my eyelids, the knot tightening in my throat. No one saw, no one cared, but that didn't mean I was invisible. Not yet. The pastor continued, his words flowing past me like a distant river. I could stand up right now. I could walk to the front, open this letter, and let the truth spill out across the room like light through stained glass. But instead, I sat there, fingers tightening around the envelope, breathing slow and steady. Not yet, I told myself, but soon. And when I did, they wouldn't see it coming. The words of the service washed over me like distant rain. I sat there in the back row, the envelope heavy in my lap. I hadn't opened it all the way yet, just enough to know it was from him. His handwriting was impossible to mistake, even after all these years. Dad's words had a way of cutting through the noise. Even when spoken softly, I slid my thumb under the flap, careful not to tear it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper inside. The first few lines stopped my breath. If you're holding this, then they tried to keep you quiet, but you've never been one to stay quiet, have you? I swallowed hard. Even now, he knew me. I glanced around the room. No one was watching. My brother was busy coordinating the next part of the service, making sure every moment went exactly as he planned. But this wasn't his story to control. I kept reading. I know you never cared about my money, my house, or the family name. You cared about the truth. And the truth is, you deserve to be heard. Tears blurred the letters. Dad had written this after the hospital visits, after the nights when I thought he was too weak to notice how they pushed me aside. He'd noticed. He'd seen the late-night arguments, the closed doors, the sideways glances when I spoke up. I pressed the letter against my chest for a moment, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the hymns. Could I really read this out loud? Would they listen, or would they laugh? Part of me wanted to tuck the letter away, pretend I never saw it, live a quiet life, far from this place. But something deeper, older, wouldn't let me. Dad had given me his voice, one last time, and I wasn't going to let them bury it beside him. I folded the letter back into its envelope, sliding it into my coat pocket. Not yet, but soon. And when the time came, they wouldn't be able to stop me. The choir sang an old hymn Dad used to hum while fixing the porch light. I remembered those evenings, how we'd sit outside, feet dangling off the steps, sharing stories in the fading sun. But those evenings ended the day I told him I wasn't taking over the family business. I still saw his face that night, tight and unreadable, as if my choice was a betrayal, not independence. "You're turning your back on everything I built," he'd said quietly, and I'd snapped back without thinking. Maybe I want to build something of my own. That was the last real conversation we had before the distance settled in. And my brother. He'd been standing in the hallway that night, listening. I glanced toward the front. There he was now, adjusting the microphone, flipping through the service notes, making sure everything went according to plan. But something about his expression caught me, a flicker, a shadow, like maybe, just maybe. He remembered that night too. He had stayed behind, done what Dad wanted, carried the family name. But in doing so, he'd become a reflection of Dad's expectations, not himself. And maybe that's why today he stood in Dad's place, but still wouldn't sit in Dad's chair. He couldn't fill it. No one could. I felt the letter in my pocket again, its edges worn soft against my hand. I wasn't sure if Dad ever forgave me for walking my own path, but he had written that letter. And maybe that was his way of saying he understood, in the end. The regret wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. Somewhere near the altar, an old family album rested beside the flowers. I hadn't noticed it before. I wondered if my brother had placed it there, if he had flipped through those pages this morning, seeing our childhood smiles, our scraped knees, our sunburned faces from summers long gone. Maybe we both missed the people we used to be. Maybe neither of us knew how to go back. But right now, the only way forward was through that letter, and through the silence that had built between us for far too long. The choir faded into quiet prayer, and for the first time since I sat down, the room fell still enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. And in that stillness, I remembered. The night before his final hospital stay, Dad and I sat in that tiny kitchen, the hum of the fridge filling the space between us. He was tired. His voice was soft but steady. "You think I was always proud of the choices I made?" he asked, staring down at his chipped coffee mug. I shook my head, caught off guard. "No," he continued, "but I made them anyway, because regret is lighter when it's yours alone to carry." He looked at me, then really looked at me. "Don't let them turn your life into theirs." I hadn't thought about that conversation in weeks. Maybe because holding on to it hurt too much. Maybe because no one else knew it happened. It wasn't something we wrote down. It wasn't in any will, any family album or service program. But it was real, and it was mine. I felt the weight of that night settle beside me, as real as the pew I sat on, and suddenly, the letter wasn't just Dad's final words. It was his permission. Permission to stop waiting for the right moment. Permission to stop asking for a seat at a table I built myself. I opened my eyes and glanced toward the front. My brother caught my gaze for a brief second, and for the first time today, he didn't look through me. He saw me, and just like that, the silence between us cracked, just a little. I took a slow breath, feeling the shift inside. The fear was still there, curling at the edges of my resolve, but now it stood beside something stronger. Dad's voice. My voice. I slipped the envelope back into my coat pocket and sat up straighter. The service wasn't over, and neither was my story. I was just about to close myself off again, to fold back into the silence, when a quiet voice spoke beside me. "Your dad. He never stopped talking about you, you know." I turned, surprised to see Mr. Franklin. Dad's old friend from the hardware store, slipping into the seat beside me. I hadn't seen him in years. His face was older, worn by time, but his eyes carried the same warmth I remembered from childhood Saturdays spent tagging along at the shop. "He told me you were the stubborn one," Mr. Franklin said with a small smile. "The one who didn't back down when people told her where to sit." I felt my throat tighten. "No one here seems to remember that part," I whispered. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "That's their loss, not yours." For a moment, the weight in my chest eased. I thought I'd been alone in this room, surrounded by cold faces and closed hearts. But maybe not entirely. Mr. Franklin tapped my coat pocket lightly. "Do what you came here to do," he said. "I doubt your father wrote that letter for you to keep it hidden." I froze. "How did you—" He smiled again, softer this time. "Your dad may not have said goodbye the way you wanted, but he gave you something better. The truth." The pastor's voice rose again, signalling the next hymn. People shuffled in their seats, clearing their throats, preparing to move on, like this was any other Sunday service. I glanced toward the front. That empty chair still waited. It wasn't about claiming a place in the family anymore. It was about honouring the words left unsaid. I turned back to Mr. Franklin, my voice barely audible. "Thank you." He nodded, his eyes kind but knowing. "I'll be right here." And somehow, that made all the difference. I straightened my shoulders, my fingers brushing the envelope once more. The fear didn't vanish, but for the first time, it felt like something I could carry. With one steady breath, I knew I wouldn't leave this room without speaking. Not for them, but for him. I stood slowly, my knees stiff from sitting too long, my heart pounding like it could burst through my ribs. Heads turned, some curious, some annoyed, but no one said a word. For the first time all morning, the pastor hesitated mid-sentence, lowering his notes as if sensing the shift in the room. I walked down the aisle, each step heavy with memories. This was the same aisle I'd walked as a flower girl when I was 7, the same aisle Dad had once carried me down after I fell and scraped my knee outside. Now it was silent, except for the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my shoes. The front row stretched out before me, empty but somehow full of meaning. I stopped beside the chair where Dad used to sit, the one everyone else had left untouched. Maybe they thought no one was worthy of it, or maybe they were too afraid to take his place. I pulled the letter from my coat pocket, its edges worn and warm from my hands. For a second my fingers trembled. Then I placed the envelope gently on the seat, a quiet offering. Not for them, for him. The room held its breath. I could feel the tension ripple through the pews. People shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell me to sit back down. But no one spoke, and in that stillness, I realised. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stand your ground in silence. I looked at the chair one last time, the letter resting there like a voice waiting to be heard. Then I turned, facing the congregation, their faces blurred together, some confused, some cold, some, maybe, just maybe, understanding. And for a moment, I didn't feel small anymore. I wasn't the girl sitting in the back row. I was my father's daughter, the one who didn't wait for permission to speak. I barely made it 2 steps back toward my seat before I heard his voice, sharp, controlled, just loud enough for the entire room to hear. "What exactly are you doing?" I turned. There he was, my brother, standing by the pulpit, his hand resting on the service notes like a shield. His face was calm, but his eyes no longer were. All the careful planning, all the structure he'd built for this day, it slipped for just a second. I could tell I'd thrown him off balance, but he recovered quickly. "This is Dad's memorial," he said, voice smoother now, like he was addressing a boardroom instead of a grieving family, not a performance. The word stung more than I wanted to admit. Performance, as if speaking Dad's truth was some dramatic act. I met his gaze, steady and quiet. "It's not a performance," I said, my voice low but firm. "It's what he wanted." I saw a flicker of something behind his eyes, recognition, doubt, pain, but it vanished before I could hold on to it. He straightened his tie, clearing his throat. "You could have discussed this before today." I almost laughed. Before today? When exactly would that have been? Between the times he ignored my calls, or the nights he shut the door when I tried to talk about Dad's final days? But I didn't say any of that. I just let the silence stretch between us. It spoke louder than anything else. For a moment, no one moved. All eyes flicked from him to me, waiting to see who would blink first. But I didn't move. And neither did the letter on that empty chair. It stayed where it was, like a quiet witness to our standoff. Finally, my brother gave a tight nod. "Fine," he said, voice clipped. "Do what you feel you need to do." But even as he stepped back, I could tell this wasn't over. Not yet. For a second, I thought about sitting back down, letting it pass, letting them win. But then I remembered Dad's voice in that kitchen, steady and tired. "Regret's lighter when it's yours to carry." So I turned, and I walked. The steps felt longer than they should have been. Each footfall echoed through the quiet room like a drumbeat counting down. I could feel every eye tracking me, some curious, some judgmental, some maybe hoping I'd trip. The aisle felt colder now, emptier, like the whole world narrowed to this thin strip of courage beneath my feet. I reached the front row, paused beside the empty chair where the letter rested. The envelope sat quietly, untouched, as if waiting for me to make the next move. I picked it up, fingers steady now. No one spoke. My brother watched me from the side, arms crossed. His jaw was tight, but he didn't stop me. Not yet. Maybe part of him wanted to hear it too. I turned toward the microphone at the front. It wasn't meant for me, but then again, neither was the back row. And yet, here we were. I adjusted the mic gently, the soft screech of feedback breaking the stillness. A few people shifted in their seats, clearing their throats, waiting for this awkward moment to end. But I didn't speak yet. I let the silence sit there, thick and uncomfortable, because sometimes silence tells the truth before words ever do. I looked down at the letter in my hands. Its folds were worn, the ink smudged at the corners, but the message inside had never been clearer. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about saying what needed to be said, whether they wanted to hear it or not. I took one last breath, and then, quietly but firmly, I opened the letter. The room leaned in, and I began to read. I had barely spoken the first few words when his voice cut through the quiet, sharp, clipped, unmistakable. "Don't make this about you." It wasn't a shout, but it may as well have been. The room froze. Even the pastor shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between us like he wasn't sure whose service this was anymore. I turned to face my brother fully this time. His shoulders were square, his chin lifted in that practiced way of his. But his hands, they were clenched at his sides. For all his calm words, he wasn't calm at all. "This is about Dad," I said quietly, steadying my voice. "I'm reading his words, not mine." He gave a short laugh, dry and hollow. "You always found a way to turn the spotlight on yourself. Even now." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. Not this time. I held up the letter for the room to see. Then let's hear what he had to say. For a moment, something flickered across my brother's face. Doubt. Or maybe something closer to fear. Because if Dad's words didn't match the story he'd been telling everyone, what did that mean for him? He opened his mouth like he was about to say something else. Another dismissal, another dig. But then, from the back of the room, a soft voice spoke. Let her read. It was Mr. Franklin, calm, steady. A quiet voice against the noise. My brother hesitated, and in that hesitation, the room shifted. People turned toward me, waiting. The power slipped from his hands, not in some dramatic fall, but in a quiet, inevitable release. He gave a single sharp nod. Fine, he said, voice tight. But this doesn't change anything. He stepped back, folding his arms across his chest like a shield, and I turned back to the microphone. The letter in my hands felt lighter now. I unfolded the paper once more, and this time, when I spoke, my voice didn't shake. I took a steady breath and let the first words leave my lips. To my daughter, the one they tried to forget. The room shifted. Some people sat up straighter. Others exchanged uneasy glances. But I kept going. You've spent your life holding the weight of silence. I hope this letter frees you from that burden, even if I couldn't do it when I was alive. My voice shook slightly, but I didn't stop. Every sentence felt like a door opening, letting air into a room that had been sealed for too long. I saw my brother tense, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor now. This wasn't the story he wanted told, but it was the truth Dad left behind. I was too proud to tell you, but I saw your sacrifices. I saw the nights you stayed with me when no one else did. You were there when it mattered, even if they said you weren't. A lump formed in my throat, but I pressed on. If they try to erase you from my story, don't let them. You are part of me, whether they acknowledge it or not. The words settled over the room like dust, visible but unspoken. For a moment, no one breathed. I lowered the letter slightly, my eyes scanning the faces before me. Some were soft now, less sure of their judgments. Some were still guarded, unwilling to let go of their version of events. And my brother. He stood there, arms crossed, but something in his face cracked, just a little. Maybe it was the weight of hearing Dad say the things he never did in life, or maybe it was the fear of what came next. I folded the letter gently, placing it on the lectern, not the chair this time. This truth wasn't just for me anymore. It was for all of them. I looked out over the room, my voice steady but soft. Now you know. And whether they accepted it or not, I had finally said what needed to be said. The room was so still. I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. No one moved, no one spoke. I lowered my hands from the lectern, the letter resting quietly where I left it. I didn't look for approval. I wasn't expecting applause. I just waited. And then, slowly, my brother stepped forward. He didn't speak right away. For a second, it looked like he might. I could see it. The words forming, then falling apart before they ever reached his lips. He stood beside the front pew, his hand brushing the back of the empty chair where Dad used to sit, and in that moment, something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but recognition. He saw what I saw. That empty chair wasn't for him to fill, and it never really was. I held his gaze, steady, but soft. For the first time in years, we weren't two people fighting for Dad's attention. We were two kids who lost their father, and neither one of us knew what to do with that. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders dropping ever so slightly. Then he stepped back. No speech, no rebuttal, just silence. And somehow, that spoke louder than any argument we'd ever had. Around us, people began to stir, the moment cracking like thin ice underfoot. Chairs creaked, throats cleared. The world moved on, because that's what it does. But for me, for us. The silence lingered a little longer. I gave my brother a small nod, not an olive branch, not a victory lap, just acknowledgement. And maybe that was enough for today. I turned from the lectern, my steps lighter than when I'd walked up. The letter stayed behind, resting against the polished wood, its story finally told. I didn't need to carry it anymore, whether they listened or not. I had spoken, and that, for the first time in a long time, felt like peace. I stepped down from the lectern, the weight in my chest finally beginning to ease. The aisle stretched before me again, but it didn't feel as long this time. For a moment, I thought I'd just walk straight out the door, leave the awkward silence behind me, but something made me glance back. And there he was. My brother stood alone near the front pew, his hand still resting lightly on the back of Dad's empty chair. He didn't look at the letter, didn't reach for it. He just stared at that chair, like maybe, for the first time, he realized no one could ever fill it. Not him, not me, not anyone. His shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. For years we'd fought over who Dad loved more, who Dad trusted more, who deserved the bigger piece of his story, and in that moment, it didn't matter. Dad was gone. And all we had left was this silence, and the choice of what to do with it. I paused, halfway down the aisle waiting to see if he'd stop me. He could have, with a word, a look, a gesture. But he didn't. He let me go, for once. And maybe that was his way of saying he heard me. In the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Ella, my niece, watching everything from the side pews. Her expression was soft, thoughtful, not judgmental like the others. She gave me a small nod, barely noticeable, but enough to feel like a hand on my shoulder. For the first time in this room, I didn't feel alone walking away. The letter stayed behind, where it belonged, and as I reached the doors, I let out a slow breath. It wasn't closure. Not yet. But it was a start, and sometimes that's enough. The doors creaked softly as I pushed them open, letting in the cool rush of afternoon air. It smelled like spring, the kind of scent that doesn't ask for your permission to exist. It just shows up and reminds you the world keeps going, whether you're ready or not. I stepped outside, the sun breaking through the clouds in slow, quiet rays. Behind me, the church settled back into itself. Voices rose, hymns resumed, and the same people who couldn't meet my eyes before now went back to their familiar roles. But I didn't turn around. Not to see if my brother sat down, not to check if anyone followed. This walk was mine. For so long, I'd waited for someone else to tell me when to leave, where to sit, what to say. Today, no one told me anything. And for once, the silence felt like freedom, not exile. I paused at the edge of the church steps, slipping my hands into my coat pockets where the letter used to be. Now there was only space. And maybe that was the point. I didn't need the letter anymore to know who I was. Dad's words would stay with me, but they didn't have to weigh me down. I took a deep breath, letting it settle. Somewhere behind those stained glass windows, they would keep rewriting our family story the way it suited them. But mine would be different. I took the first step down the stairs, the click of my heels steady, not hurried. Because I wasn't running anymore, I was walking on my own terms, and wherever this path led next, at least it was mine to follow. The apartment was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet, almost. I set my keys on the little side table by the door, their clink breaking the stillness. No voices arguing in the kitchen, no footsteps pacing the hallway, no lingering shadows of family filling every corner, just Quiet. I slipped off my coat and draped it over the back of a worn armchair, the kind of chair Dad would have called ugly but honest. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, stretching across the hardwood floors in long, golden streaks. This wasn't the home I grew up in. It wasn't filled with family heirlooms or dusty photo albums or the weight of generations before me, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking into a space that reminded me of who I used to be. I was walking into a space that could become whatever I chose. I stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around me. It wasn't uncomfortable, it wasn't lonely, it just was. And in that stillness, I finally exhaled. All morning I'd carried the tension of a lifetime, the expectations, the judgments, the fear of saying the wrong thing, of being the wrong person. But here, none of that followed me through the door. No one told me where to sit. No one silenced my voice. I walked over to the small kitchen table where an unopened journal sat beside a cup of cold tea I'd forgotten to drink earlier. Maybe later I'd write it all down, or maybe I wouldn't. Not everything has to be remembered to matter. Sometimes it's enough just to live it and let it go. I looked out the window at the late afternoon sky, as soft and endless. Tomorrow life would go on, bills to pay, groceries to buy, a world outside that had no idea what today meant to me. And maybe that was okay. For now, it was just me, in this little apartment, in this quiet moment of my own making. And for once, that was enough. I was halfway through making a fresh cup of tea when the knock came at my door, software hesitant. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it. Maybe it was a neighbour, or someone selling something. Maybe it was the world creeping back in before I was ready. But something told me to open it. And there she was, Ella, standing there in her worn jean jacket, her eyes carrying that familiar uncertainty I used to see in my own reflection years ago. "Hey," she said softly, "do you have a minute?" I stepped aside without a word, letting her into the quiet space. She looked around, taking it all in, the simplicity, the peace. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I poured her a cup of tea without asking if she wanted one. She smiled a little at that, like she understood the quiet language of tired women who didn't feel like explaining themselves anymore. We sat at the kitchen table, the one I'd bought second-hand and sanded down myself. For a while, neither of us spoke, and then, softly, she said, "I didn't know Grandpa wrote you that letter." I met her gaze, steady but gentle. Most people didn't. She looked down at her cup, tracing the rim with her finger. "I always thought Dad was the one who carried his voice, but today I realized it's you." The words landed softly, but they cracked something open in me. I didn't respond right away. Not everything needs an answer. Sometimes hearing it is enough. She continued, her voice quieter now. "I guess I just didn't want you to think you were standing up there alone." I felt my chest tighten, but it wasn't from pain this time. It was something closer to gratitude. "Thank you," I said simply. She smiled again, this time a little less guarded, and for the first time all day, I didn't feel like I was carrying Dad's legacy by myself. Maybe it would always be heavy, but now it didn't feel impossible. After Ella left, the apartment settled back into its quiet hum. But it didn't feel empty this time. It felt earned. I stood by the window, watching the city slow down as the evening stretched across the skyline. The same window I'd looked out of so many nights before, wondering if I'd ever feel anything but forgotten. But now, the quiet wasn't exile. It was peace. I thought about Dad's letter, still resting back at the church. I didn't need it here. His words had already settled where they needed to be, in the cracks of my heart that no longer felt broken, just lived in. I smiled to myself, small but real. For years, I thought courage looked like shouting the loudest, proving myself in every room that doubted me. But maybe real courage was quieter than that. Maybe it was choosing to walk away when staying would only reopen old wounds. Maybe it was sitting alone in your own space and feeling whole anyway. The kettle whistled softly, breaking my thoughts. I poured another cup of tea, not because I needed the comfort, but simply because I wanted it. Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one, like little beacons reminding me that the world kept spinning, whether I fought for my place in it or not. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was falling behind. I was exactly where I needed to be. I took my tea to the worn armchair by the window, curling up with a blanket draped across my knees. No fanfare, no audience, just me, the quiet and the steady hum of a life I was finally learning to live on my own terms. And somehow, that felt braver than anything I'd done in that church. The next morning, the world didn't look different. But somehow, I did. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the journal I finally opened. The first page stayed blank for a while, not because I didn't know what to write, but because, for once, I wasn't writing for anyone else to read. Dad's voice echoed softly in my mind, not as a command, not as a memory, but as a quiet presence. Don't wait for them to hand you your place. Take it. I smiled, brushing the tip of my pen across the paper, not quite ready to write, but no longer afraid of what the words might say when I did. I looked across the room at the empty chair by the window, the one where I used to imagine him sitting, telling me what to do next. But this time, it stayed empty, and that was okay. Because now, my voice filled the space, quiet, steady, mine. I stood, stretching as sunlight warmed the hardwood floor beneath my feet, and as I walked toward the window, I whispered something I wish I had said sooner. Thank you, Dad, for letting me find my own way, even if you didn't know how to say it. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed, people hurried by, completely unaware of the quiet battle that had just been won inside these walls. But I knew. And maybe that's all that mattered. Have you ever been asked to sit in the back of your own story? And if you have, did you ever stand up anyway?